Ẹ̀yin tí ẹ̀ ń wò wá nílé lóko, ẹ káàbọ̀ sí ìjíròrò tèmi àti Àrẹ̀mọ Gemini. Bí ẹ ti mọ̀, orúkọ mi ni Ṣọlá Òjìkùtù. Èmi náà ni ẹ mọ̀ sí Yorubamama. Ẹni tí à ń bá sọ̀rọ̀ lénìí ni púpọ̀ nínú wa mọ̀ sí Àrẹ̀mọ Gemini Yusuf Balógun. Ṣùgbọ́n màá jẹ́ kí wọ́n sọ nípa ara wọn fún wa ní àsìkò díẹ̀. Lénìí inú mi dùn gan láti ṣe àkọ́kọ́ irú èyí nítorí my background is in journalism, and it's something that, paired with culture and Yoruba work, gives me a lot of fulfillment. And that is why, again, noting my audience, why I'll be dipping in and out of Yoruba. Mo sọ fún Àrẹ̀mọ Gemini pé àmà máa code switch ni a máa sọ Yorùbá dé, a máa sọ fi Gẹ̀ẹ́sì hà. Bí torí mo ní mọ̀ ń pé nínú àwọn tó ń tẹ̀lé mi, àwọn kan wà tó jẹ́ Yorùbá wọn ó dágájá, àwọn kan dẹ̀ wà tó jẹ́ pé wọ́n ṣẹ̀ ń bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí máa kọ́ Yorùbá ní kí a má bàa yọ wọ́n sílẹ̀, náà ni a ṣe máa ṣe bẹ́ẹ̀ yẹn. Àrẹ̀mọ Gemini, ẹ káàbọ̀ sí ètò mi.
Ẹ ṣeun gidi gan. Orúkọ mi fún nítorí ìfọmọnìyàn ṣe àwọn tí àwọn ṣẹ̀ jẹ́ akẹ́kọ̀ọ́ èdè. My name is Yusuf Alabi Balogun. I go by the pseudonym ÀRΕMỌ GEMINI. I'm a poet. I'm a storyteller. I'm a writer. I think I like to say cultural. I like to say I'm a cultural curator because these days, àṣà ló mẹni tó ń gbóhùngà. And then, when you look at the fact that there are politicized agenda to cultural promotions on some end, you think twice before you call yourself a cultural promoter. So, lè sọ, tá bá rí kọjá níbí, tó bá pè wá ní cultural promoter, bẹ́ẹ̀ náà ni. But lásìkò tá a wà ń bí, wọ́n bí wa sínú àṣà, a sì rò pé àṣà tó bí wa sínú èyí ohun tó dára ni kí àwa náà kí a gbé láti ibi tí a ti bá. Inú mi dùn láti wà lórí ìkànnì yìí. I'm most honoured to be conversing with you. Thank you so much.
Ẹ ṣé gan, Àrẹ̀mọ Gemini. I'm even more honoured to be conversing with you, and very much as you say, àṣà ló mẹni tó ń gbóhùngà. Nǹkan táwa mọ̀ tá à ń ṣe irú iṣẹ́ yìí ni pé àṣà Yorùbá tí wọ́n bí wa sínú ẹ̀, àṣà tó rẹwà ni, tó dẹ̀ ní ọrọ̀. Nítorí ẹ̀ a fẹ́ kó parun la ṣe ń ṣe díẹ̀díẹ̀ tí à ń ṣe nínú ẹ̀. Bẹ́yìn ṣe ń tọwọ́ bọ̀wé táwa náà ń tọwọ́ bọ̀wé, tá jọ ń ṣe ìfọwọ́sowọ́pọ̀, a máa túbọ̀ ran ara wa àti àṣà náà lọ́wọ́ láti tún máa gbòòrò sí i. Ẹ ṣeun tí ẹ bẹ̀rẹ̀ pẹ̀lú yẹn. Nísìnyí mo fẹ́ béèrè nípa orúkọ yín, ìnagijẹ yín, Àrẹ̀mọ Gemini. Báwo lẹ ṣe ṣẹ̀dá orúkọ yìí?
While in secondary school, I was a very inquisitive child. I grew up being introspective. Àwọn ọmọ get inside, má jáde nílé, má dá sára lékẹfà. And because of that, almost everything I knew was from a place of either I read it in books or I dug it on the internet, Ayé cyber cafe. So I can't really remember how I encountered the whole idea of astrology and horoscope back then. Mo dẹ̀ ká pé àwọn ọmọ tó bá bí ní sáà báyìí lóṣù kẹfà ò Gemini ni wọ́n pè wọ́n. Mo dẹ̀ máa ń kọ ìtàn ní gbogbo ìgbà tí mo wà nílé ìwé nígbà yẹn, ṣùgbọ́n èdè Gẹ̀ẹ́sì ni mo fi ń kọ ìtàn. So I felt okay. Everyone was having pen names, everyone was having pseudonyms. So it was only logical that I find something for myself. So I started using Gemini then because I felt like, it was not common knowledge. And I love the idea of explaining it to a lot of classmates who were my age. But you were familiar pẹ̀lú kan tó ń jẹ́ astrology, kí lọmọ JSS1 wá pẹ̀lú astrology. So by the time I left secondary school, I was already actively writing on Facebook, WordPress and all of that. And I was creating in English then. But at some point, wọ́n lóhun tá wáyé là ń yé. when I eventually had to deviate and evolve into being a Yoruba creative, kò fi bẹ́ẹ̀ jọ ohun tó wà logical pé kó máa ní òun ṣẹ̀dá iṣẹ́ lédè Yorùbá kí orúkọ tí ènìyàn dẹ̀ gbé sórí tí wọ́n fi ń pèèyàn kó máa jẹ́ orúkọ Gẹ̀ẹ́sì. Ó tàpá sí lẹ́gbẹ̀ẹ́ kan, ó tàpá sóhun ta ní à ń ṣe. Tó bá ti jẹ́ pé ọmọ ilẹ̀ Gẹ̀ẹ́sì ni èèyàn, àmì náà lè sọ fún Karen Bábà pé kó pe rẹ̀ l'Àṣàkẹ́. Tó bá jẹ́ ọmọ ilẹ̀ Gẹ̀ẹ́sì ni tí ó wá nífẹ̀ẹ́ sí àṣà àti èdè wa, it's understandable. But I didn't want to discard Gemini either because a couple of people already knew me by that name. So the only logical thing for me to do was to find ÀRẹ̀Mọ and merge it into it. And ÀRẹ̀Mọ was not just coming from a place of randomness. ÀRẹ̀Mọ was coming from a place of pé àwọn kan ti wà níwájú wa kí digital era yìí tiẹ̀ tó dé tí wọ́n ń ṣe nǹkan tó ń tà lè kà kún ìgbàṣàga yálà pẹ̀lú èdè orin tí wọn bá tiẹ̀ bu ìkún wọn lákòókò yìí kò túmọ̀ sí pé ọba kọ́ ni wọ́n láyè tiwọn tí ọ̀pọ̀ ènìyàn bá ti rántí Láwùyí Ògúnníran kò túmọ̀ pé bàbá kọ́ ló jẹ́ fáwa nínú pé wọ́n ń kọ ìtàn àbí wọ́n ń kọ ewì. So àwa kan wà bọ̀rọ̀ jí nídìí ayé wa at this point in our life and say, oh, we are a king, we are an absolute authority in this age. So tá a bá lọ tán àbí tá a bá jáde and people feel like, oh, you are worthy of being called a majesty, great, fine. Ṣùgbọ́n tára yóò bá pè ẹ́ lọ́ba má pera ẹ́ lọ́ba. So I felt, oh, ÀRẹ̀Mọ to acknowledge the predecessors from where I was coming. Exactly. While also claiming that, oh, I am being an outlier within my generation because, oh, even when you think of art and poetry, èèyàn tó ń ṣe English poetry gan ò tí ì là ká má sì sọ pé òun fi Yorùbá ṣe.
In fact, you're leading me to my next question, which essentially is this. Onígbólóhùn kan tí ẹ máa ń sọ tó máa ń jẹ́ kí n máa túnú rò, particularly as a fellow creative again in this niche space that we can describe Yoruba culture creativity as. Gbólóhùn yẹn ni a road less taken is still a road. And that sentence resonates so much with me because I see you perfectly situated within that road. And I think, again, it takes someone like you who is almost fearlessly conquering and taking or less taking road to pull others by the hand and make that road into a thoroughfare. So it really typifies what you're doing. Ẹ jọ̀ọ́ ẹ bá mi sọ̀rọ̀ díẹ̀ sí nípa this your self-appointed, almost because again, àwa náà la pera wa sí iṣẹ́ yìí, kò sẹ́ni kankan tó máa ní yá lọ tọ career yẹn nídìí Yorùbá right now. Àwa náà
Wọ́n ti ẹ̀ ní advice èèyàn kò ṣe.
Wọ́n ti ẹ̀ máa ní kò tiẹ̀ má ṣe ni. Nítorí can you talk a bit more about this your self-appointed role and what it has felt like for you on this road less traveled?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, báwọn Yorùbá ṣe sọ, wọ́n ní ìpín la bá wáyé, adélé ayé tán ni ojú ń kan gbogbo wa. And at this point in my life, I look back at so many even personal decisions, academic decisions, and almost every decision that I've taken that have led me to this point in my life. And I feel like ó láwọn nǹkan tó máa ń ṣẹlẹ̀ sẹ́yìn at some point in your life, and you feel like, oh, it is a tribulation, or it's a mistake in your journey, or it's a setback, but àṣìṣe ò sí nínú ìrìn àjò ẹ̀dá. So, that which you consider as a mistake, as an error, is actually leading you to where you are supposed to be at that point in your journey. So if someone told me that, at this point in my life, I would be, writing actively in Yoruba or be a full-time Yoruba artist, I would argue it off because I had the same dream like every regular child, growing up, leave secondary school, go to universities, study law, live the regular, average conventional life. But ọ̀nà mi ti gbà bí, mi ò dẹ̀ lè yíṣẹ́ padà. At this point, I've gone too far to return. And maybe people look at life and what we define as job from the place of conventions. But as long as tó bá ti ń mú owó wọlé consistently, then it is valid. But I mean, you of all people can tell that, what we do is not something you wake up every day and feel like, oh, credit alert kan tún wọlé lónìí. There are days that
You're
answers the
not really
questions,
rolling
and there
to
are
the
days that
bank. We hope
you
to one day.
get on most days gan wàá kọ́ra dé báǹkì ni, because ìgbà tó bá tún já charges nínú èyí tí ò tó. But then when I encounter people who either they watch me perform, or they listen to, or they read my works, or they listen to my works online, they are like, oh, it met them at a point in their journey. It spoke to them at a point in their journey. It feels like that is the entirety of the reason why we are living. Ayé wa kéré láti jẹ́, the absolute focus of our own life. Our life is too small to be the center of our own life. But tá a bá fa okùn ilé ayé àwọn ẹlòmíràn, and we involve them in our realities through our own realities and our own biases, we teach them, then it is worth living. What we do is beyond promoting the culture. What we do is actually influencing people's lives beyond culture. And for me, it's a worthy way to live. It's,
And it gives
it
us that
supersedes
personal
every other
fulfillment.
aspect of materialism, to be very honest.
I think I agree very much with you. And then obviously you're speaking to the choir here, because again, for me, that personal fulfillment that comes with touching people with your work and putting out quality art supersedes the material or the monetary for me. And eventually there's always that hope, of course, that, if we continue to pursue these dreams, then eventually the financial aspect will catch up with it. And just, that's the dream, and we're putting it out there. I'm feeling no Elédùmarè. So ẹ bá mi sọ díẹ̀ nínú ìrìn àjò yín ní ilé-ìwé. So I remember that, I read a bit about you, about how you started writing, writing, at least published writing, from around the age of 15. What was your formal education journey like? And was it the typical, but, tell us more about it. And then, kí ni ẹ rí sí formal education in comparison with the type of native education that I imagine you have also acquired along the way? Ẹ bá mi sọ díẹ̀.
So I think I would love to say first that I am one of those children, or I was one of those children who were born below the pyramid. Like, in fact, bóyá kò sí pyramid lókè gan ní irú ibi tó bí àwa, ó ti ẹ̀ mọ̀ pé pyramid wà ń ta. We were just there, and we were living our small life then, and we didn't even realize that, there was more to life outside.
What
So,
was your upbringing like? What was childhood like?
my dad was an engineer turned Ifa diviner. At some point in his journey, when he did engineering, tí ọwọ́ ò tẹnu, tápá ò tẹnu, and then it became a constant revelation that, oh, you have to go back to what your predecessors were doing, which is a far divining. So you have to go back to it. And my mom was a petty trader. She was a regular trader. I mean, I grew up seeing her selling pap, at that Basiogi Shishe. Then at some point, she went into
Nǹkan tí mo mọ̀ pé tó máa ń pèrè ẹ̀ lọ́mọ ìyá ológe, ta ló ń bá yín dupò ọmọ ìyá ológe?
yes, on Twitter I encounter every time. I think that is Pamilerin that calls himself Omoyo Logi consistently. And every time I see his post, it reminds me of, those moments in my life. And then at some point she was selling soft drinks. So owó ìṣègùn, owó ìṣòwò ló fi tọ́ wa dàgbà. And then, we are the kind of family that ṣùgbọ́n ebi ò pa ní. You get, so it was within that I went to primary school, went to secondary school, about being the type of child that was, the type of child that was always getting into trouble in school because he was always being bullied. So Kato Pai secondary school, go at school mefa. But my interest had always been in art. My interest had always been in, writing right from time. And I said something earlier that I wanted the conventional life too, like every other child, leave secondary school, you know, apply for seat for WAEC or GCE, and then further your education. But ìgbà tá a wá ṣèkínní tá a ṣèkejì, tí ó jẹ́ pé if it's not a case of your WAEC result has been cancelled before because you did not pay for examination runs, or result ò tiẹ̀ jáde for one reason or the other, and then owó aláta ló ń tò jọ ló ń tò pọ̀ tí wọ́n fi ń sponsor this registration at some point. So at that point I felt like, okay, maybe it's just reasonable to take a break, kí àwọn ẹni ẹlẹ́ni kọ́ yé da omi ságbọ̀n, and then I find something else doing. So at that point in my life I was learning handiwork. What did I not learn? I learned how to repair phones. At those points in my life I learned a couple of handiworks, but at every point in that journey I was writing, even though I was doing it as something I just loved doing, until it now eventually consumed me. And then I discovered that, àṣọ tí ẹ máa ń perform kíní tí mo máa ń kọ yìí, àṣọ máa ń perform ẹ lórí stage, àṣà àwọn nǹkan tí ẹ wà tó tí ẹ like nǹkan tí mo ń kọ yìí.
So at that
And
time,
then
were you
looking
writing
back,
still only in English at the time, or had you started to infuse Yoruba into it?
so at that point I was writing in English, but I was writing with the influence of Yoruba. So there's this Chinua Achebe and Ngugi argument, where Ngugi is like, to decolonize you
Right,
have to write in the native
write in
language,
your native
and
language,
Chinua is like, you can write in English
but
and
still
still
carry the
decolonize.
culture.
Exactly. So I think as at that point I was following the Chinua Achebe's terrain, because when you read my works as at then, mo lè title English poem ní Àjà, and then when you are reading it I'm code mixing with Yoruba, or I'm even writing about Abobaku or Abiku, but I'm writing about it in English. So the Yoruba influence were very, very heavy, but at some point I just feel like if you want to tell a story of a certain people, why not just tell it in their language? Èwo ni ká kúkú máa pẹ́ kọ̀rọ̀ sọ, kúkú sọ lédè wọn kó yé wọn tààrà. Exactly. Èwo ni ká máa because you discover that there are some words that, regardless of how much you translate it, it does not do enough justice to it, and then you keep feeling like you are cutting some things short. And then you still write these things in English, and someone is still coming to tell you that, pronounce it, pronounce it, low right tenses. Maybe I can be taught the structural aspects of my language, but máa níbi tó máa dé kó tó lè kọ́ mi ní syntactical aspect language mi pé tí ilẹ̀ bá mọ́ ìwọ kọ́ ni wàá sọ fún pé tí n bá lágbàlagbà kí n sọ fún pé ẹ káàárọ̀. But in English, I can write good morning, and then tomorrow a new law comes up, and you are like, the lexicon has changed, or the terminology has changed. So at every of those points, I was already writing under the influence of Yoruba. And then these days, I meet a lot of people who are like, you're at a point in your life, so even if you feel like you don't have this enough resources to go back to conventional school, there are people that are willing to, support you and say, okay, let's sponsor your education. But at the same time, I realize that a lot of these people talk under the influence of the certificate syndrome. I feel like it's one thing that is common here in Nigeria. Tí o bá lọ sí university, tí o
So
bá
you're
ní degree
getting
tó ní PhD, what you are doing cannot be validated. What you are doing is not valid. Now, who gives the validation? Who defines what is validation, or what is valid at the end of the day? What
that's a
defines
very pertinent question. Determines validation, and particularly for people like us who work in culture, African culture, cultural studies, African studies. Why is that validation? And it's something I've also questioned myself again, as much as I do pursue these validations potentially. Why is it takes a British institution or a foreign institution to award that certificate in your language or your culture? Tells you how well your research has been done, and even potentially, it actually even takes you going to those universities, those institutions to learn culture. It is very contradictory to the sense of actually that gaining that cultural knowledge. So what do you, Kiniero, considering that you sort of told the path of unconventional education in a sense, Kiniero nípa one, and then is there any part of you, even present past, that still wants to pursue that conventional formal education route, say maybe get a PhD or a master's sometime? Kiniero, see.
So I feel like sometimes ẹnìkan ní láti forí fàgbọn kó fi kó àwọn yòókù pé kò kí ń ṣe pé orí ò ṣe fi fàgbọn, the repercussions may be there, there are pitches I would still, there are, applications I would still apply for. And then someone would say that, oh, if your level of education does not meet this requirement or that, this does not work. So yes, the repercussions exist. But then, a lè sọ pé, there's a part of my decision that lies with agídí inú, what we call the coconut egg. But there are some people that genuinely, they do not have the resources in the first place. Ó
That's
wù wọ́n láti ṣe, but they do not have the resources. Now, we cannot castrate those people out of the society or, ostracize them and say they do not belong, to the society, or what they are doing is not valid. Nítorí pé, èso tí wọn ò pọ́n tó, in our look. So in a way, every time I look at my own conventional journey, I feel like it's a reminder, it's an evidence to people who probably would have the same journey as I do, or who would be unlucky to not have access to the conventional things, to know that if I can get to this point in my journey, tí mi ò dẹ̀ tíì dúró, then they can even do much more. And yes, I have I have every intent to pursue conventional formal education at some point in my life, but most certainly not in Nigeria. And as against what a lot of people, the reason why a lot of people want to go to foreign land láti kàwé is because they need that validation pé Cambridge ni mo ti kàwé, Switzerland ni mo ti gba degree mi, but that's not what I am chasing. I have an internal issue with the Nigerian system of academia. The Nigerian system of academia here does not really prepare you to face life. In fact, I could ethically say it that we have a depressive system of conventional education here. Àwọn ọmọ lọ́dún mẹ́rin nílé ìwé, kámágàtì ẹ̀ máa sọ̀rọ̀ ASUU strike o, wọ́n wà nílé ìwé, and then they are studying what they desire to study, and they are still being depressed. The facilities are not in place. The mediums are not exactly 100% straightforward. Kila Mbaka, Kini Ambaka. And yes, Olayinka Ekurere was like, some of us are chasing a saner education climb. Yes, people are attempting to redefine things. I feel like Generation T, Hawaii, is that generation where a lot of, especially Gen Zs, are attempting to define things. And I don't like to say that àwọn millennials ló ba nǹkan jẹ́, because àwọn ọ̀dọ́ tí ò lálàáfíà náà, àwọn náà ṣì wà láàrin wa at the end of the day. But sometimes you just have to step out, because I don't think that I would spend this much years of my life staying at home only for me to now go back to that same system. No. Already wọ́n ti kà mí kún outcast. Wọ́n ti kà mí kún outcast, and that is why we have that obsession with nígbà tí ọmọ bá lọ sílùú òyìnbó láti Nàìjíríà bíbí tó níláárí, if Ṣẹ̀gilọlá or Ìṣẹ́pẹ́ gets validated outside this country today, ẹ máa gbọ́ something in our bio bí Nigerian born, American made, tí ò mú ọpọlọ wá, because ilẹ̀ yìí la wà tẹ́lẹ̀ látọjọ́ ìta tí ń ṣẹ̀dá iṣẹ́ yìí, and you didn't see the reason to make. Why do we wait for that that space outside there? Exactly. Exactly. It's not just a millennial problems. We are a product of this society. And at this point, I just feel like if at any point in my life I ever get to that point where I feel like, okay, èyí tá a ṣe tó, a fẹ́ wá lọ, pursue conventional, because I mean, ìmọ̀ kì í tán. Ohun tí ò kì í tán ni ìmọ̀. There's always so much to learn.
Ṣùgbọ́n
I would rather step out,
believe pé
adopt more, and then be resourceful, and then káwá lè bímọ tán, káwá sọ pé okay, ìwọ ọmọ yìí o, maybe we have been able to effect a system that is relatively better. But mo ti forí fọ́ àgbọn ju kí n tún jókòó sí ilé àgbọn yẹn lọ, kí n tún máa bá wọn pa àgbọn bẹ́ẹ̀. Because sometimes if you are not careful, the monster you are chasing, you may end up becoming that monster.
ó dà, ṣùgbọ́n mo ní nǹkan kan tí mo fẹ́ bẹ̀rẹ̀ nípa yẹn, torí lóòótọ́ the grass again is always greener on the other side. Lóòótọ́ àwọn ìdojúkọ kan wà nínú bí a ṣe ń kọ́ gbogbo àwọn nǹkan tá à ń kọ́ ní Nàìjíríà, ṣùgbọ́n ibí yìí náà kò ń ṣe pé ó rọrùn, èèyàn máa fi kan lẹ̀ gbọ́kàn ni. Ó tún ní nǹkan téèyàn ń pàdánù téèyàn bá jókòó síbi, yàtọ̀ sí nǹkan tí irú àwa tá a wà níbí nsìn, o lè má ní gbogbo àwọn tó yí ẹ ká, that social support and that cultural support is often missing, and one still has to go back to get it. And then also again, I feel like your journey actually typifies someone that has more than anything pursued self-improvement. Torí kò sí ẹni tó máa gbọ́ bẹ́ẹ̀ ṣe ń sọ̀rọ̀, bẹ́ẹ̀ ṣe ń kọ̀wé tó máa rò pé ẹni yóò kọjá bóyá university kò ṣe degree in English language àbí even Yoruba language. So a lot of it has been self-improvement. So you actually taking the agency to be like, I want to do this. And ibẹ̀ ìyẹn ó lè ṣẹlẹ̀ ní ibikíbi. Bẹ́ẹ̀ ni ṣe ń ṣe ní Nàìjíríà náà ni àwọn èèyàn míì lè ṣe ń bí o, ṣùgbọ́n Nàìjíríà tí ẹ ti ń ṣe yẹn náà, ó ní ìdí tó jẹ́ pé that is the fount, because that is where that thing you're very interested in, that is where it exists. So ṣé ẹ rí àǹfààní nínú pé kí ẹ bẹ́ẹ̀ ṣe wà níbẹ̀ yẹn, and what it really has given you by way of what you've been able to pursue, despite all the challenges that have been inherent?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, mo gbàgbọ́ nínú pé kò sí àṣìṣe níbi tí orí bá dání sí. There is the conversation of pé, tí orí bá dání sí kò sunwọ̀n, lẹ́sẹ̀ gbéra ńlẹ̀ kó lọ síbòmí. But I believe that orí kì í ṣàṣìṣe dání síbì kan. If the fact that I am here at this particular point is because I am meant to be here, and I'm still meant to be doing some I still have a purpose yet unfinished in this particular point. But ohun tó wuni ó lè má jẹ́ ohun tí orí ẹni wù. So as much as if it is left to me, I would say, oh, I am stepping out to chase outside to pursue education outside this space. And to be very honest, it's not like in my top 3 plans.
I want to draw your attention to one comment níbẹ̀ yẹn tí Ọláyínká Ẹ̀kúnrẹ́rẹ́ ní. What if our purpose says ohun tí wọn kì í wọ̀n,
tẹ́ni ẹlẹ́ni ní yá wọn lára? Absolutely, it's I say something every time. I'm at this point in my life where I do not chase diasporic validation, if that is the word. I do not chase diasporic validation, and I do not need any pink man in my world to come and give me a pat where ohun tí ò ń ṣe ó dá. So one of the greatest honors I've ever experienced in my life was getting a validation from Jimmy Solanke weeks before he died. Mi ò rò pé diasporic attention kan wà tẹ́nìkan fẹ́ fún mi tó fẹ́ ju ìyẹn lọ fún mi. But at the same time, I look beyond labels when I think, and I look beyond the concept of, I feel like we put people in boxes. We put people in boxes a lot, a work iṣẹ́ ara ibi, ìwọ kì í ṣara ilẹ̀ yìí, ìgbàgbọ́ ẹ̀ kì í ṣe ti bí. And we forget at the end of the day that, when we tear off this label, humanity ló so gbogbo wa pọ̀. It is what binds us at the end of the day. So to be very honest, I would not, because of label obsession, and nítorí, what people define as, stay where you are rooted. Stay where you are rooted. Kí n wá para mi, see where you are rooted to, to
concur.
Exactly. To concur with what people tí wọ́n bá tó bá dàbí tó bí ò bá yàn fi ọwọ́ ara ẹ̀ tún obì yẹn ṣí obì yẹn kó o ṣí sí ibi tó wù ẹ́ tó fẹ́ kó wà. So at this point, at the end of the day, I feel like, when conversations like we are obsessed with, and again, I must say that there are some things that I would do at this point in my life that does not necessarily come from the standard place of, foreign validation. So, for example, when you read my profile, one of the most consistent things there is the fact that, I want to, sell out the O2 Arena London for, Yoruba oral arts. Now, mi ò fẹ́ ṣe yẹn, mi ò gbèrò láti ṣe yẹn nítorí pé mo feel pé ìgbà tí mo bá dé London stage ní ilé ayé mi, or ní art mi ṣẹ̀ṣẹ̀ ní endorsement pé ohun tí mò ń ṣe yìí, I am doing it because there are personal parts of my life that are not obvious to the public. So what we curate here on the internet, ó dàbí showcase ní ọjà tẹ́ bá fi síta nínú glass tẹ́ fi àwọn èèyàn lọ máa rí, lọ máa mọ̀ pé ní. But there are some things that you do, not exactly for audience validation, but because it is important for some certain levels of fulfillment. So for a kind of child tó jẹ́ wípé àwọn predecessors ẹ̀ wọn ò gorí newspaper rí, tó bá sọ̀rọ̀ lórí rédíò, ó máa dàbí pé wọ́n ṣe àṣeyọrí ní ìdílé yẹn ni. Now, in the eyes of the general public, wọ́n lè wò pé kí ló ń bá ká ṣó dìgbà tó bá lọ sí radio house kílé ayé ẹ̀ tó dáa ni. But within his space, within his private corner, ó mọ ohun tó túmọ̀ sí fún òun. But even at this point in our journey, with these few numbers that we have already, a lot of audience feel like they have an absolute say on our journey. Àbí pé everything tó bá ṣe, you are doing it to entertain us. But to be very honest, exactly, you get gbogbo wa la ní ọgbẹ́ tá à ń pa mọ́ra tí a ò dé ta wí, tí a ò dé ta sọ at the end of the day. So, if I say, I intend to leave this scene today and further for educational purpose, is not necessarily from a place of diasporic attention, because really, if I was looking for that diasporic attention, I feel like mi ò tí dé peak journey mi o, but àwọn ọ̀rọ̀ kan bẹ tá a ti dìídì kọ̀, because I feel like àwọn nǹkan tó so mọ́ àwọn òfúnnilẹ́dìí ẹ̀sìn gbòdìdí ọmọ lọ́wọ́ ẹni, àwọn orú opportunities yẹn ti wá téèyàn ti kọ̀ pé okay, ẹ má worry. So kì í ṣe pé wọn kì í wá, but when you know what you want for yourself, beyond what the audience thinks, you feel like, and to be very honest, if at the end of my journey, I do not have the privilege to go to, the tertiary institution, mi ò rò wípé ó bù mí kù, tàbí wípé ó jẹ́ ohun kan tí mi ò ní, when you lie on your deathbed, I do not see it as one of those things. Mi ò bá dẹ̀ mọ̀ kí n dẹ̀ ṣe kinní yìí, or kí n gba offer yìí at this point in my life. My greatest win ni pé mo ti kọ àwọn ohun tí ó jẹ́ ìtàn, àwọn ohun tí ó jẹ́ èròǹgbà tèmi, ó ti stop ẹnìkan, ó ti stop just one person from committing suicide, ó ti jẹ́ kí ẹnìkan gbàgbọ́ nú ara ẹ̀. So tí n bá bímọ lọ́la, rán ọmọ yẹn ní tertiary institution, tẹ́mi tí mo jẹ́ àbá ẹ̀ wá lọ, mo ti ta ọmọ mi lọ tertiary institution yẹn, and that is enough win for me.
That is it. Eshe. Thank you very much for that, and I very much go with that point of yours that there are lots of personal reasons people have for pursuing the things that they pursue that may not be quite apparent to the outside world. Nísìnyí, ẹ jẹ́ ká kúrò níbẹ̀ yẹn dẹ̀ ká wo iṣẹ́ yín ní àyè máa sọ̀rọ̀ nípa ẹ̀ dáadáa ṣùgbọ́n mo rí pé ẹ jẹ́ ẹnìkan tí ẹ ní èrò púpọ̀, ẹ máa ń ronú jinlẹ̀, and you're very opinionated as well. So, kíni ẹ máa ń jáde nínú iṣẹ́ yín? You always see a lot of emotional depth as well as cultural depth. What is it, would you point to, that shaped this perspective growing up? Is it ìrírí ayé yín, àbí just observing people around you, or parents, or like, what is it? What would you attribute that, and that's out of the box thinking, again, that took you away from that, I just wanted to live a conventional life, go to school, do these things, and just live normal. But now you're sort of an outlier, and you are a pioneer in many respects. Kí ni nǹkan tí ẹ lè ní pàtó tó jẹ́ kí ẹ̀yin bí ẹ ṣe wà yìí tí ó jẹ́ kí this version of you jẹyọ?
Right from time we were, I grew up in a family setting where we were seen as being different, and not just different in the regular
In
way,
the sense
but
of,
different in the sense that Emma dasi won, Emma tie dewaju le won. Because again, my dad was an Ifa diviner, and this is Nigeria where there's so much white religion obsession. And people feel like, ìṣègùn ni bàbá yẹn ń ṣe, Ifá ló ń dá irọ́ o, ẹ má dé lé wọn, oníṣẹ́ ẹbí ni wọ́n. So, that alienation was equally applied to àwa tí a jẹ́ ọmọ. So right from time, ọ̀nà tí àwọn èèyàn fi ń wo igun ayé kọ́ ni a fi ń wò right from time, because when you are in your space, láǹfààní àti dá sáwọn èèyàn, people don't even want to listen to you and understand why you are seeing life from where you are seeing life. You learn to mutter within your spaces and start thinking within yourself. So I said every time that èròǹgbà mi àti ìlànà tí mo fi máa ń ronú, I do not necessarily do it from a place of performance, but I do it from a place of there is no absolute truth. And ìrírí àwọn èèyàn yàtọ̀ sí ara wọn. So maybe because I now happen to be one of those children who existed in those spaces where there was no pyramid at all. And I encountered, growing up, people who, had a lot of privileges. Thomas often pé, ìwọ ò tí gbogbo ọmọ class ló ti ra mass set, ìwọ ò tí ra mass set, and then, you are trying to explain that, nǹkan báyìí ló ṣẹlẹ̀. And they are already telling you that if they don't have the resources, why are they sending you to school? Kiniko. You cannot explain it to them because privileges can be blinding.
Money, very Meji, not to interrupt you. Did the fact of seeing your dad come away from a conventional life to pursue what was more closer to home? And was there a certain method that he displayed that you think subconsciously you gain strength from one? And then is nísìnyí tí ẹ wá bá ń wo now this more popularized adoption of Ifa and Yoruba spiritual practices and the isolation that caused for you nígbà tí ẹ kéré, what do you think now that, okay, now it's getting popular? Nǹkan tí àwa ti ń ṣe tẹ́lẹ̀ tí àwọn èèyàn ostracize wa, now it's getting popular. Báwo ni ẹ ṣe ń jẹ́ kí ẹ máa kí ni èrò yín nípa ẹ̀?
Well, ìgbé ayé kì í yé yí. And I've come to discover that the more things change, the more they remain the same. So my dad always, while he was alive, he would always say that, and not necessarily even within the space of spirituality or religion now. A lot of times, see, maybe you do something and then he's angry. Gbogbo ohun tí ẹ kàkún yẹn, gbogbo ẹ̀ náà lẹ máa ṣe padà sí ibẹ̀, òun náà lẹ máa ṣe jòkó tì, tẹ máa ṣe ṣe, òun náà lẹ máa ṣe kàkún òtítọ́. And then, it recurs in my head right from time. And a lot of people, especially as a Yoruba, so I did a walk few years ago, which was a walk on queerness, and it got a lot of backlash. It got a lot of backlash. A lot of people came like, báwo ni wàá ṣe pẹ́rẹ́ ní Yorùbá riot tí wọ́n máa sọ pé you do not see a problem with, queer people or the queer society. But my dad was a free thinker. Maybe he did not realize it as and when he was alive. I say he's a free thinker because my dad was an Ifa diviner. Tó túmọ̀ sí pé bóyá Ifá kìíní kan ló yẹ kí n máa jẹ́. But my first name is Yusuf because I grew up in a home where my mom was a practicing Muslim. So with the fact that there was an Ogun temple in our house and there was an Eshu Grove in our house and Igba Ifa, Okon Ifa, Owanle, I still grew up praying in the Islamic way. I still grew up at some point in my life going to churches while he was alive. He had friends that were Alfas, he had friends that were pastors. Odedinwolowo, Toba Dileya would kill rams because of my mom, who was a practicing Muslim, and not necessarily because he believed in it. And that line of free thought in spirituality, in his association of his people, maybe there were people that took him for granted and then, misused the assets. But what made Ojoku? So if he practiced free thinking and it worked for him, mi ò rò pé yálà ẹ̀sìn, àbí yálà ìgbàgbọ́, àbí yálà, sexuality or what people prefer as their orientation, ó yẹ kó tó lóhun tí mo fi lè yàyàn pé ìwọ ò tó léèyàn, àbí ìwọ ò tó lẹ́ni tá à ń bá gbé, ìwọ ò tó lẹ́ni tá à ń dá sí.
Mo gbà pẹ̀lú yín gan nínú nǹkan tẹ́ sọ yẹn. Again, I think that free thinking, in a sense, or being pluralists in one's worldview, is something that certain environments can bring about in the deep thinker. And a lot of the time, when I compare notes with other people who I believe, like myself, kind of believe in a multiplicity of ways of beings, there's always something that they have, which is that if as conventional as their background could have been, there's always a contradiction or a hybridity that exists. So bẹ́ẹ̀ ṣe ń sọ̀rọ̀ nípa Ifá Grove àti gbogbo àwọn nǹkan bẹ́ẹ̀ yẹn tí ẹ ní nílé pẹ̀lú ẹ̀ bóyá ẹ̀yin ń kírun, ẹ̀yin ń gbààwẹ̀ ní Ramadan, ẹ̀yin ń ṣọdún. It reminds me very much of my own upbringing, where I had a Muslim father, an Alhaji twice over, and a Catholic mother. They never converted each other until my father passed away. He was Muslim and he never did convert my mother, who is still Catholic till date. And that just brought to me from a very young age, I always questioned the existence of an absolute right. What makes something absolutely right to the exclusion of all else? Because even in my child's mind, I couldn't see how these two people who were very devout and, to my knowledge, very good in quote people, one of them would eventually end up in the bad place. So I cannot really subscribe that. And CTD it has really generated a certain respect for multiplicity and an understanding that it is in hybridity that the best actually occurs. And I see that hybridity very much in your work, in your approach to like things now. This one you pointed out, which is queerness, even in your approach to things like ideas around feminism. I'll read an excerpt from one of your poems around feminism, that I think aligns with feminism. And I think I'm highlighting this because a lot of the time, people who are not very deeply embedded in Yoruba thought and Yoruba philosophy often think that Yoruba is patriarchal and no arguments. But then you always bring that feminine appreciation of the feminine into your work. So I'll read the excerpts from your poem, and it's the start of one of your spoken words. Said, when the Yoruba wants to report a child to the elders, they use their father's name. When they want to report a child to the gods, they use his mother's, because it takes a god to know another god. There are two ideas that you're enumerating that. One, the absolute importance of the matrilineal line for certain important things, which includes spirituality, and also the elevation of a female person, almost, or in this case, at par with a deity. Ṣé ẹ lè bá mi sọ díẹ̀ nínú èrò yín nípa ìyẹn, just to make people understand how sometimes you need to go closer to a culture and its worldview to actually understand. And a lot of what we know as patriarchal this, women don't do this, women don't do that, is actually wrong.
So I say it every time that there is nothing like Taba, and I would use this in the context of entities now. I don't believe that Nigeria is a bad country. But yeah, Nigerians are, they are bad people in Nigerians, Alison. Yeah? And then, in the same way, I do not think that, a culture can be patriarchal or, can be misogynistic or whatsoever. But the proponents of those culture, one leg base, it can be patriarchal because ènìyàn ni wọ́n at the end of the day. They are beings and, they are fallible. So when we say Yoruba is misogynistic as a culture, I do not think it is because even when you look at the concept of gelede,
Misogynistic, patriarchal, which there's a slight difference. Misogyny is maybe bordering on the extreme, maybe. But I know that some people might say that. But if we focused on the patriarchal, which is again that viewpoint that it's a man's world, even within the Yoruba world. Kati ẹ̀ má sọ pé bóyá wọ́n ń gún àwọn obìnrin mọ́lẹ̀ àbí nǹkan kan bẹ́ẹ̀ yẹn. But just in that sense, so yeah.
Yeah, and when you look at the spiritual concept of the Yoruba space in which they have always existed anyways, you think of pé àwọn nǹkan tó di òpó ìṣẹ̀ṣe wa mú. You think of gẹ̀lẹ̀dẹ́, you think of oro, you think of egungun, you think of àjẹ́, and then you realize that even down to ìpèbí tá à mú ọba wọ̀ tí ọba bá fẹ́ jẹ, women were the strongholders of the space. Women were the ones at the background. But because, àwọn akọ ló ń fọhùn lóde, àwọn akọ làgbà tó jẹ́ proponent nígbà yẹn, àwọn akọ ní, should I say majority, and they found a way to shove women behind. It was very easy for them to put these doctrines into space and shove. And I mean, you cannot attack people. You cannot attack people or necessarily condemn them when they say that the culture is patriarchal because ìṣẹ̀dá ènìyàn ní kínú bí ni ká wí. Ìṣẹ̀dá ènìyàn, for every action there is a reaction. A ò dẹ̀ lè gún ẹṣin ní kẹ́sẹ́ ká wá ní ó ń tàpá. But the culture was not meant to be patriarchal. The fact that wọ́n ti wá sọ di ohun tó ti súnmọ́ patriarchal, ìgbà wo ìkòkò babas, I mean, there are, like you already know, there are innumerable points and instances pé tá bá fẹ́ máa sọ pé case studies àwọn nǹkan tí there is obviously patriarchy or even misogyny in that sense tí wọ́n ṣe presently táwọn èèyàn á so mọ́ culture. But again, there are people who are not aware of culture itself and what the culture itself really states about gender politics. Látilẹ̀, especially when you go into Ifá, ọ̀rọ̀ ẹnu èèyàn, àṣẹ ẹnu èèyàn là ń tẹ̀lé, àtẹ̀lé ohun tí Ifá gan fúnra ẹ̀.
And then again, just just to clarify what ÀRЭ MỌ GEMINI, the connotations of that excerpt of yours I read, is that when you want to report someone to others, you say, lágbájá ọmọ tàmẹ̀dù ló ṣe báyìí. But when you go to the oracle for the Ifá divination, orúkọ ọ̀yá ẹ̀ ló máa ní kó mú wá. Ìyá ẹ̀, ìwọ orúkọ tí àtọrúkọ ọ̀yá ẹ̀. Nobody will ask, who is your daddy? It is Tani, mórúkọ ẹ wá. So I believe that's what you meant when
Absolutely.
You said the mother, that, the mother's name that is then being referenced. So it's very important in that sense. So that shows like the absolute importance of the maternal line. And then also, again, Bashen Songpe, it is iṣẹ́ àwọn èèyàn, ó yàtọ̀ sí the ethics of the culture. Even our deities, bá ṣe máa pè wọ́n, even they had to be corrected. So much less irú àwa ènìyàn. Torí mo rántí odù Ifá kan tó jẹ́ pé lẹ́yìn tí Elédùmarè dá ilé ayé tó fi wọ́n lẹ̀ tó ní ó dá ẹ máa lọ ṣe ilé ayé o,
Yes.
wọ́n wọ́n Ọ̀ṣun sí Ẹ̀gbẹ́. Wọ́n ní àkíní ṣe bóbìnrin lọ̀ṣun pé kí ló mọ̀?
And then
Wọ́n ń
things
ṣe
went
ilé
wrong
ayé
for
ni o.
them.
Lẹ́yìn náà ni wọ́n sọ gbogbo bí everything started going wrong and then they had to go back to say ilé ayé tá à ń dálẹ̀ yìí kò lọ dáadáa kí ló ṣẹlẹ̀? Wọ́n ní ṣé bẹ́yìn mélòó mo gbàgbé mélòó lọ jẹ́ bóyá ẹ lè rán mi létí. Ó dàbí pé ẹ fẹ́ nìkan sílẹ̀ tá lẹ fi sílẹ̀ wọ́n ní ṣé bóbìnrin nìyẹn Ọ̀ṣun kò mi ò ní láti wá ní tí ẹ bá lọ mú yẹn wá ni ẹ ṣẹ̀ máa wá mọ ibi tí solution yìí ti máa.
Absolutely.
That shows the level at which our ethical thought really tries to strongly put in place gender. We may not even use the term equality because again, terms are more in but the fact of a balance in the roles of the genders specifically. So I really like that aspect of your work, which is that you always seem to be courageous about speaking the unspoken or the things that you think you like to challenge people's perception about things, and it really comes across when you in your characters particularly. So Nisin, I want us to go ahead to talk about your books because again, your books are why we're here. Really, it's the brilliance of your words is amazing. I've read one of your books and I'm hoping to read the other one. I've been meaning to ask you, so we need to get the second one. But now tell us about your books. When it's your come across your books, tell us kí ni àwọn ìwé yín méjèèjì kí ni wọ́n jẹ́ kí ni wọ́n dá lé lórí àti bẹ́ẹ̀ bẹ́ẹ̀ lọ.
So I feel like bóyá double-edged sword gan ni màá pe àwọn topics tí mo máa explore nínú ìwé mi ni because I have encountered in interviews a lot of time where they feel like, oh, summarize your book for us or tell us, what your book is about. And I discovered that I cannot, emphatically generalize it because I always explore so many things. I mean, you've read Shegilola, and then, we cannot outrightly say that, oh, in fact, I feel like Shegilola Romero Gidon is bigger than Shegilola herself in the book. But, I feel like some things that always revolves in all of my work is the conversation of the female society because mo gbàgbọ́ pé kò sáwùjọ láìsí obìnrin. Kò sáwùjọ láìsí obìnrin. They are the strong ones.
Is this
if you want
to characters in
if you want to destroy the society, wipe out the women. They are the I feel like the reason why I compare women with God a lot. And then when you think of it within the human space,
Loluda.
Obìnrin Oluda, she's the one that carries it. The burden of creation is on the woman. That task is on her. So we cannot talk about her enough. Because I strongly believe that beyond the structural problems of our nations and human problems, one of the core problems that we have is that we've disrespected femininity a lot in our society. We've disrespected women a lot. Àti fi ojú wọn gbolẹ̀ gidi gan. Kò dẹ̀ sí àwùjọ tó lè lóun fẹ́ dàgbà tó dẹ̀ máa fojú abo gbolẹ̀ tó máa lọ síwájú.
And in the world, essentially, not just local, but it's a global thing.
Exactly. And I try to re-emphasize this every time in all of my works. True. And when you look at Shegilola and when you look at Ishepe, the topics are different. Shegilola was more about the encounter with, her fiance, Benga, and then that of Latif and Afolake and all of that escapades. Exactly. Being exploited. And, it seems very small in the eyes of certain people, where maybe it's something that is happening within, the primary level, but the primary level is actually the most important level because the disrespect starts within the home and then it escalates exactly to the general society. So I try to talk about, women. I try to talk about abuse a lot in my
And
works.
also
I try
financial
to
dependence or incapacity as well. That's a big one too.
hmm I try to talk about marginalization, or especially
Mm,
those people that we do not regard. And I
mm,
explore the idea of loss and grief a lot in my works. There are,
mm,
my works are naturally chaotic. Chaos
mm.
interpolates in my works a lot because I
And
feel like
often tragic.
the life we live is a chaotic life. I mean,
It's
Shegilola Romeo Gidon is practically chaotic from the first chapter to the very
then,
end.
then,
There is no moment of absolute relief in the work. And I mean,
mm,
except we are deceiving ourselves, or à ń fẹ́ kọ́ tọ́nà alẹ́ fúnra wa, there's no absolute joy or absolute calm in human's life. It's either something is happening there or something is happening in someone life tó kan èèyàn one way or the other. Bí ká máa ṣe Instagram live kí network MTN kó bá bálabàlá kiri. That is one of the
then,
chaos. That is one of the chaos.
you know,
I try to, so most times people try to, I encounter a lot of works, especially in this age. You will meet Gen Zs who will tell you that they want works that romanticize happy ending. And as much
mm.
as that is ethical, I mean, some people read works from a
But
place
then
of
again, let
wanting
me
an
pick
escape.
up on that. Jẹ́ kí n bèrè
Hmm.
ìbéèrè kan lọ́wọ́ yín. There is chaos, and chaos is a fact of life. But there is also tragedy. Do you believe that tragedy is also as much a fact of life? And is that why your work in prose, Arokonyi, Gongo, often has a strong tragic element to it, particularly in the endings? Kílódé tí ó rí bẹ́ẹ̀? And I will go, so that's one aspect of my question. The second aspect of my question ni, however, àwọn ewì yín ò rí bẹ́ẹ̀ per se. Àwọn ewì yín máa ń ní bí ìmọ̀lára ìfẹ́ and a strong sense of encouragement, building up character versus the books that tend to be quite
Pros.
tragic. Is it that you approach these forms in different ways? Àbí kí ló dé? Àbí is it something tí ẹ̀yin gan ti ṣàkíyèsí? Àbí ó jẹ́ nǹkan tí àwọn èèyàn kàn ń sọ fún yín pé àbó ṣe rí nìyẹn? Àbí báwo ni kí lẹ máa sọ nípa yẹn?
So I in fact
Do you use
say
them
that
for
at this
different
point,
purposes?
if someone insists that I should give myself, or I should classify myself a space in the authors category and all of these labels, I would say I'm a tragedian because I have 3 unpublished manuscripts, prose, and they are all tragedies. Mi ò rò pé mo tí ì kọ any story tó wáyé pé even 50% ẹ̀ kó wá wà
Gbogbo
comic
wọn dé
or
and they walk off
relief,
into the sunset.
they are all tragic. And
Mm,
I feel like prose gives me the ability to say some
mm,
things that I cannot fully say in in my poems. Because
mm,
tẹ́jọ́ bá pọ̀ jù gan nínú poem mi, tá a bá kọ poem mi nísìnyí tó jẹ́ ìṣẹ́jú mẹ́fà márùn-ún, wọ́n á ti máa wò pé kí ló dé, ẹjọ́ wo ni
mm.
ẹ̀ ń rò. But I mean, when it's a book, it's much more, it's much more compact, it's much more bulky. People want to read, and I'm able to do a free flow of my mind and thoughts. So
And then
I want the
interpretation.
same ideas that recurs in my prose kind of recurs in my poems, but the only problem is that they are not full blown they are not full blown in terms of
Putting their life.
extremity exactly
Mm,
as I can
mm,
do with prose.
mm,
And because they are not full blown there, obvious. So some people will read my works and feel like, oh, what is going through your mind? Why is your mind so chaotic? But the choice of topics I explore, because even when you look at my poems, you see my poems are either on marginalization or women
Then,
abuse or
yeah,
injustice.
the themes
But
are
in
pretty much
prose,
the same, but the application or the approaches to them
exactly,
are
the
somewhat
approach
different.
is way extreme because there are some
Mm,
stories that I just feel like I cannot conveniently tell in they
mm,
are not meant to come to life as poems. They have to come to
mm,
life as as books. And in fact, I
mm.
have play manuscripts, even though I haven't put out
Mm.
any any play yet. I
Anything
feel like that
play.
is still an untouched
Mm.
gem. In fact,
Where
èèyàn mélòó ló
within
kọ
those
play?
two? Well,
Mm-hmm.
where
Like
between those
presently.
two would you place your plays? Where would you place them?
So
Are you able to realize them as fully as pros or a bit less than that?
I feel like play gives even more dialogues. Even when you read my prose, you see that I am very deliberate about dialogues and my characters always having something to say. So I think one of the reasons I've always loved plays ni pé kò sáyè narrative description púpọ̀. Everybody kàn
Hmm.
fẹjọ́ para wọn lọ ni. So
Dialogue
because
heavy.
again,
Mhm.
there are some things that if you as a regular person comes out and you state it, wọ́n á gbáyàn lẹ́nu pé báwo ni wàá ṣe sọ ọ̀rọ̀ báyìí. But tí n bá sọ pé
Theory of that
character ló sọ,
connection. Mm-hmm.
exactly, tí n bá sọ pé character ló sọ nínú iṣẹ́ yẹn, character lẹ máa da ìpè bò. Ẹ lè wá attack me because you feel like, oh,
Give the
the
writer a
character is,
certain sort of detachment or anonymity in that sense.
exactly.
Not be me. No, hear
Òun
me.
ló sọ Gbénga ló ṣe báyẹn
Oh,
sí
yeah.
Ṣègilọlá. Èmi kọ́ ni mo ṣe bẹ́ẹ̀. It gives me
Only,
that ability of detachment and I love it so much.
oh, I see. I will look out for your play. Please make one come to life, please, so that we
Mm-hmm.
can have the full benefit of your no holds barred view take on the world. But Kato, I wanted you to read because I want people to experience a bit of that emotional depth. Could you read mi ò mọ̀ bóyá ẹni lórí àbí bóyá ní máa ní láti wáyé kí n ti bí yín pé mo fẹ́ràn your ewì yín ohun tí o gbọ́ kọ́ ni o gbọ́. Mi ò mọ̀ bóyá title àkọlé ẹ̀ nìyẹn àbí bóyá ìwò ṣùgbọ́n those were
Yeah.
the lines that kept repeating that I kind
Yes.
of focused on. But ṣùgbọ́n ibi tí mo fẹ́ràn gangan ni ibi tí ẹ bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí ní máa sọ nípa bí aṣáájú ni wọ́n ó pè wá tí a bá like it was so tender and so moving about the longevity that this narrator, I don't know, not a narrator, but this voice had envisioned for him and his ololufe, his
Mm-hmm.
ayanfe, and the pictures he was painting was so real to me. Ṣé ẹ lè rán ṣé ó wà lórí ní ẹ lè bá wa sọ díẹ̀ nínú ẹ̀?
Mo mọ picture lines yẹn. Aṣáájú tí wọ́n pè wá nígbà tá ò bá sí níbí mọ́ and all of that. But tí n bá sọ wípé mo rántí lines yẹn yékéyéké bí mo ṣe sọ, aṣáájú ni wọn yóò pè wá nígbà tá a bá ka ìkàkùkà lórí Instagram live.
Ẹ̀jọ̀ ẹ fún mi ní àǹfààní láti ẹ ṣàrọra fún mi ní fídíò mo fẹ́ gbé sí orí kíní mi kí àwọn tó ń wò báyìí tó bá fẹ́ padà bí or I will even find a way to link them connect them to that. But it was powerful to me and the emotion and the tenderness that was there was so in contrast to the tragedy of your prose, which is why tí mo ṣe fẹ́ fa ilé yọ nínú kíní wa yìí. Nǹkan míì tí mo tún fẹ́ fàyọ ni pé there was one important thing that I think you pursued in Ìṣẹ́pẹ́, and that is something that's very not often spoken about but alarmingly prevalent, and that is the sexual exploitation of children and particularly the male child. It is very silent. And I really like how you highlighted that, and particularly the scenario you painted in how a benign, well-meaning adult can then morph into that person. I won't lie to you. I have had encounters with many men, my, peers,
Yeah.
whose first sexual encounters were with much older women in positions of authority or care over them. Ó lè jẹ́ bóyá ẹni tó ń bá wọn gbé àǹtí kan, and they shrug it off and they make it seem like it doesn't. In fact, it seems almost as if they is street cred on some level. But I want to interrogate what that does to the male psyche, how you portrayed it, and why it is important to speak that and to let people be more aware of that.
So, in Ṣẹ̀gilọlá Arómirógìdán, I don't know if you remember the Latif character in Ṣẹ̀gilọlá Arómirógìdán. In his encounter with Bering, he was abused. He was raped by Bering, but Latif was a much older guy, he was not a child. In fact, ó ti níyàwó ńlé kí obìnrin míì kí ó tó fipá bá a lò pọ̀. And then, it was a kind of social experiment for me when people read the work, and I discovered that a lot of people were angry about so many things in the work, but almost 97% of the people that read Shegilolo Gidon just ignored that part as if it didn't happen. I was like, but
This big
if it
thing.
was a female character, it would be a
Like,
full-blown chaos. So in Ishekpe, he was a younger, he was apparently a child, a younger child, and then was an older person, and then everyone is saying, why this? And then I'm looking at the double standard, like, oh, you see, this double standard exists in different positions that we look at, because some of the same people who are saying, oh, why would small Erioluwa get abused by his teacher, were the same persons who read SAO and did not even see a problem with Lateef being abused. Nítorí pé òun jẹ́ ọkùnrin tó ti dàgbà. So exactly. So when an older guy comes on Twitter now and says that, I went to a party yesterday and I feel abused. Wọ́n á sọ pé ní ọjọ́ orí ẹ̀ níbi tó dàgbà dé yìí. And I feel like we are doing something that is dangerous. I am very keen, I am very particular on the conversations of feminism, even though I think of myself as allies. And I don't know, I feel like there is no way to statistically measure which gender is getting much more abused than the other. But I mean, the popular story says it is the women. And when we look at it from some angles, we are forced to agree that, ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ àwọn tí mo bá pín gender wọn ò ní ọpọlọ ní tòótọ́. I agree. But at the same time, the repercussion is that there is feminism and there's misandry. And there's that demonization of men that extends to even little children. So just tell you, yàrá pẹ̀lú ọmọkùnrin ọdún mẹ́rin, márùn-ún, mẹ́fà, because she sees him as a predator automatically because he's a guy. And yes, maybe there are even younger children. I will not blame them. I will blame the people that raised them. Because you see, 12-year-old boys, 11-year-old boys, and they say some kind of, objectifying things against women that you feel like, but it's a reflection of the society he grew up in. But orientate. As much as we are, doing justice for Chaya, because she was, violently abused, and, it's a disrespect against humanity, what has been done to her. We should be able to come out and maintain this same energy.
And I think that's what I like about your work, that as much as you do advocate for women, you do not flinch from advocating for men as well, and that is where that balance comes in. Now, gbogbo ọ̀rọ̀ tá a bá ní láti sọ náà la máa ṣàkọlé kọjú kúrò nídìí kan ká focus lórí kan pé àyílẹ̀ nìkan. No, it is important to hear the other side as well. As much as, yes, the male gender can be predatory, maybe even more predatory than the female, they also as well suffer abuse at many different stages of life, whether they're children, whether they're adults. It can also happen, and it's important for those stories to be heard, and for that ignorance about these things to be challenged. So you share and it is very, to see those social issues written in Yoruba, tackled in Yoruba, is something that I think one must not take lightly at all. So nísìnyí mo fẹ́ béèrè lọ́wọ́ yín. Now, how do you manage? First of all, it's not about managing, tackling these things in Yoruba. Do you ever feel limited by language, or do you even see it as your strongest creative tool? Ṣé ẹ máa rùn báwo ni mo ṣe máa sọ kí ní àbí ṣé ó máa ń nígbà tí ẹ máa tó máa dàbí pé ọ̀rọ̀ yẹn ò fẹ́ wá sí yín lórí bẹ́ẹ̀ ṣe máa ṣàlàyé àbí bẹ́ẹ̀ ṣe máa gbé kinní yìí kalẹ̀, àbí ṣé ìyẹn gangan ló máa ń ràn yín lọ́wọ́ àti pé.
I like to think that I heavily think in Yoruba language, and because I do think in Yoruba language, it's always, in fact, when I create in English, I always feel limited, or I'm trying to cross-examine a word in the dictionary, like òyìnbó tí mo lò ń bíbí yìí ṣé ó dẹ̀ fit context yìí àbí mo ti ń sọ̀rọ̀ nǹkan míì but 97% of the time about 99% of the time ó máa ṣòro kí n tó léde Yorùbá kan kí n wá rò pé ṣé Yorùbá yìí ṣé ó dẹ̀ bá nǹkan yìí mu. And because I feel like our indigenous languages, especially to the readers that are indigenous to it, it is raw. It conquers the gravity. Thunderstruck ó yàtọ̀ sí àrásánpá o. The weight, the potencies, you cannot kọ́dẹ̀ pèèyàn ní prostitutes. Ó yàtọ̀ sí pé kọ́ ní pé alágbèrè ń nàbì ń ṣekúṣe. It because you see the metaphor, you see the allusions, you see the inferences, and I feel like over times, especially mi ò fẹ́ okay, this is touchy now. I do not say it from a place of because mo máa fẹ́ clarify pé mi ò ẹnu mi ò gbà láti sọ pé àwọn tó wà níwájú wa wọn ò ṣe tó. Ẹnu mi ò gbà láti sọ pé àwọn tó wà níwájú wa wọn ò ṣe tó àbí àwọn tó fi èdè Yorùbá dára nígbà yẹn wọn ò ṣe tó. But I feel like there was a lot of safe playing around, especially around morality. Tó jẹ́ káwọn èèyàn wò pé tó bá ka ìwé Yorùbá ń sìn ohun tó fẹ́ kún ẹni ìgbẹ̀yìn ọmọ onítẹ́tẹ́ ìwà pẹ̀lẹ́ múra síṣẹ́ ọ̀rẹ́ mi, and we left some triggering conversations out of the box. Ó máa ṣòro kẹ́ tó lè rí iṣẹ́ kan tó wá ṣẹ̀dá ńgbà yẹn that was heavily on the case of abuse or gender politics. These were topics that people shied away from in writing, and then it made me feel reading these works that maybe our language was not emotive enough to capture these things. Ṣé tí a bá tiẹ̀ ka iṣẹ́ òyìnbó tí ó bíyàn nú tí ó provoke emotion, ṣé tí a bá ka iṣẹ́ Yorùbá ní ọ̀nà kan náà ó lè tún bíyàn nú bákan náà. Can you read a Yoruba novel and it will make you break down in tears? Can you read a Yoruba novel and it will make you get pissed off? But I feel like with my two works already, I've been able to successfully achieve that. Absolutely. And I feel like it's it is something that has always been there. And I genuinely hope that this particularly does not stop with me, but actually catalyze more generation of creatives who feel enough. They are not just Yoruba language now, even Igbo, Hausa language and all. And they come to realize that their language are emotive enough.
And that is a big question most people do have. Even I, when I started my Yoruba journey, because you have an edge over me, I would say, because you are very steeped within the language. I mean, Yoruba. Mi náà ń túra mi kún bẹ́ẹ̀ ni, ṣùgbọ́n bóyá ó pẹ́ mi díẹ̀ kémi tó ní light bulb moment ń pé ó dá ọ ẹ jẹ́ n bẹ̀rẹ̀. Ṣùgbọ́n ìgbà tí mo kọ́kọ́ bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí fẹ́ máa kọ́ àwọn ọmọ mi máa ń ṣe nídìí pé even just something as simple as saying I love you to your kids, right? Ó máa ń ṣe nídìí pé kò ṣe é sọ ní Yorùbá until I actually began to say it, and I found that actually you can laugh in Yoruba, you can be affectionate in Yoruba, but many people actually of my generation feel like Yoruba is a day àti máa bọ́mọ wí wá jágbá o, màá nù ẹ́ o. They don't know that we have emotive language in Yoruba, and it is one of the things that teach us that follow me pé
Yoruba who are new learners of Yoruba language, you discover that ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ wọn èdè èébú èdè èpè ló máa sábà ń kọ́ because nǹkan táwọn èèyàn ń lò jù nìyẹn. So you will see someone who is Igbo or Hausa tó bá máa kọ́kọ́ sọ Yorùbá lẹ́nu, àwọn èyí tó jẹ́ èébú àbí báwí ń bẹ̀ ló máa kọ́kọ́ because we don't use the affectionate part of it as though love is a taboo, and that in fact was what I was trying to do with the Ayanfe poem that you said you liked. Because personally, I think one of my greatest fulfillment for that poem was that it blew up. Because I wanted people to realize that you can write a love poem in your native language and it will resonate deeper than it would if it was, English language.
that it feels an even deeper place in your heart. And so there's that thing Mandela said, right? Speak to a person in a language they understand and it goes to their head. Speak to them in their language and it goes to their heart. But ni and fani, solid, intentional quality works that bring us closer to our languages and help us realize that all our range of emotions and the depth of our emotions can be absolutely well communicated in our languages. And that's something, ÀRЭ MỌ GEMINI, that you do very well in your books and in your
Thank you so
poetry.
much.
But now I want to ask you about the technical aspects of writing in Yoruba. Torí òǹkọ̀wé lẹ́yìn lóòótọ́ àgbàlagbà lẹ́yìn kọ̀wé fún ẹ lè kọ bí irinwó ojú ìwé. Èmi ní ṣókí ni fún àwọn ọmọdé, but from
Mo
what
ń padà bọ̀ wá kọ́ṣẹ́ o, mo fẹ́ kọ children story, mo ń padà ẹ máa padà ṣe master class fún wa.
ṣùgbọ́n ibi tí mo lọ ní, I know the in high intensity and the laboriousness of the work of writing in Yoruba, like the confronting their critics, and for you to be able to produce such fantastic writing and also brilliantly edited as well, that with all the tomates and everything, how much did that take? And kí ni ó ń fún yín ní ìwúrí àti tún yìí máa ṣe lọ, tún máa ṣe, when surely there are easier things you can knock out.
Mm-hmm. Even at this point, I feel like, for every work that I create, especially my prose works, I still feel like, oh, nǹkan ṣì kù tí mo ṣì lè ṣe, ojú kan ṣì kù tó ṣì lè wo iṣẹ́ yìí, àyẹ̀wò kan ṣì kù tí mo ṣì lè ṣe, àtúnṣe kan ṣì kù tí mo ṣì lè ṣe. But I feel like one of the reasons why a lot of people have shied away from doing it in the first place is because of this same technicality. So keyboard mélòó gan ni ó wà diacritic friendly, by the time tẹ bá convert ẹ sí PDF tán, tẹ bá convert ẹ láti doc sí PDF, gbogbo diacritics yẹn á dà padà ní, and then you would have to start from the beginning. And if you are not careful, ẹni tó ń print ẹ gan, o lè kọ dòre mí sí tóun á tún yí sí mí dòre tó máa dẹ̀ sọ pé òun kọ̀ rò pé the signs are there for the fun of it. So it's unpaid labor, to be very honest, because I feel like the payments we collect from our works and all of that, we do not do it from a capitalist approach, because that bá ṣe capitalist approach gan, iye tí ìwé yín jẹ́ Rovinite kọ́ ló máa jẹ́, because by the time the bookstores collect their commissions and all of that, èló ló kù, èló lójú owó. Exactly. Ká tó wá tún sọ pé mo rẹ́ni yóò fẹ́ rà kó lásẹ̀sì, òkè jẹ́ kí n bun ẹni yìí ní ìwé at the end of the day. But I feel like it is in the doing that makes it easier to prove and then even advocate for what you need. Because tá a bá ṣe tá a sọ pé technicalities ò jẹ́ ká ṣe, the disservice we are doing to ourselves unconsciously is that it can never get easier. So for example, you of all people I think there was a time we were talking about the fact that Shegilola is not on Amazon because Amazon does not give room for works fully written 100% in Yoruba to be on their platform and all of that. Now it is easier at some point for me or for people that read my works and have problem of accessibility, especially in diaspora, to probably write to Amazon or to advocate for a need to open that window for works to exactly. But nígbà tí ò bá síṣẹ́ tá a ṣẹ̀dá ní Yorùbá in the first place, because of that reason, tó bá kọ̀wé sí Amazon á dá wọn lóhùn pé àwọn iṣẹ́ ọ̀hún dà. Iṣẹ́ náà advocate fún dà at the end of the day. So like I initially said, àwọn kan ní láti forí fàgbọn káwọn kan lè mọ̀ pé ó ṣeé ṣe. To be very honest, the joy is in the doing, and I feel like this journey kì í ṣe journey ọdún kan, kì í ṣe journey ọdún márùn-ún, ìrìn àjò yìí ṣì gùn. And I believe that in 5-10 years from now, the technicalities will not remain the same. The things in provisions will not remain the same. It will get better. One day we are having people who are interested in culture in tech spaces, and definitely. Exactly. We are having people who are interested in culture in web development spaces. There are people like Babakola Tubosun, who is actively doing his stuff. Every one of us, there is no one way to promote culture or to advocate for heritage. So ohun tí ẹ̀ ń ṣe láyé ara yín advocacy ni, and it's only void tó ń fill. Ohun tí wàá ṣeré ń ṣe only void tó ń fill. Ohun tí Ọláyínká Ẹ̀kúnrẹ́rẹ́ ṣe only void tó ń fill. Ohun tí Lumi ń ṣe only void tó ń fill. Nígbà tí gbogbo wa ta bá fọ́nká in different fields ta play a role yìí, at the end of the day we would collectively assist ourselves and make the journey easier for each other.
Benny. And then now that comes to sort of what the next question I was going to ask about you, which is sort of like about legacy. And it is, no, let me go first to your contributions. What I think your particular contributions with your two works and also your poetry, but more about your two works, is that it actually brings Yoruba literature into the contemporary world. And so then, tẹ́lẹ̀ wọ́n ní àkílẹ̀ èèyàn ti ẹ̀fẹ́ kà nínú iṣẹ́ Yorùbá ṣe bí wọ́n kàn máa kọ́ wa iṣẹ́ ní ògùn iṣẹ́ this and that and all those moralizing things. But now you're introducing urban complexities and you're introducing just chaos on a different level that's not like, okay, obìnrin tẹríba fọ́kọ ẹ̀ and all of those things. Not only that, you're also bringing in the modern world because ẹ máa sọ̀rọ̀ nípa bóyá ìkànnì ẹnìkan àbí ẹ máa sọ̀rọ̀ nípa wọ́n wa mọ́tò, wọ́n ní musical careers, don't try láti.
Exactly.
Like bringing Yoruba into the present. And for me, that is one of the biggest contributions you're making. Sorry, we have been very stuck in the past. Lóòótọ́, bẹ́ẹ̀ ṣe ń sọ gbogbo àwọn tá à ń bọ̀wọ̀ fún tá à ń pọ́nlé bẹ́ẹ̀, àpọ́nlé tó bẹ́ẹ̀ ni ó yẹ ká pọ́n wọn lé. A gbọ́dọ̀ dúró síbẹ̀ kó jẹ́ pé kọ́ máa bèrè ń pé can you recommend any Yoruba works for me? Kó jẹ́ pé iṣẹ́ Fágúnwà àbí iṣẹ́ ni mo ṣẹ̀ máa ní ẹ lọ́ka. As someone who is a teacher, I teach, people of different ethnicities. They do ask for resources. And so I can now tell someone that has learned or is starting to learn to read properly and understand Yoruba, okay, I can recommend this book by ÀRΕ MỌ GEMINI. Like, that is amazing work. And I don't know if you understand the implication of the work you're doing now and how that legacy is something that you're already creating now into the future, not only by the fact that these works now exist and are documenting our modern world, but also in encouraging other people to do the same, to write and to just situate Yoruba in the present day and not keep it in that atavistic form. It's always a looking back. Now you're dragging Yoruba forward into the future. Is that something that you intentionally wanted to do, or did you, or is it something that along the line, it is the kind of thing you're interested in writing about?
I think that first I would genuinely say thank you, because when they say flowers, most of these things feels like flowers. I do not, appreciate I appreciate the fact that I do not take it lightly that you see my works and you see what I do and you even consider it within this gravity. And to be very honest, I feel like the greatest people who make impeccable history do not set out to make history. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So to be very honest, more for every work I write, for every work I create, I largely write from a place of either I want to correct an ill or I want to state an orientation within one lenses. And I feel like Yoruba, if again the road less taken is still a road. So I've always felt like to be able to reach the people in the grassroots. And then you discover that while what I was trying to do is advocacy through art, I have started preserving language, I've started resuscitating language, and actually started doing what you consider as legacy. Me, for me personally, do not set out for pay, boya tabado botan, or when we are not here, káwọn èèyàn máa sọ pé kìnìkan he's validated, he did this, he did that, he's the first person to do this, he's the first person to do that. Because when you've gone for that, you lose your essence. And when you lose your essence, you start thinking of àwọn ohun tí àwọn ohun tí mò ń ṣe yìí mò ń ṣe kó fi jẹ́ pé ní 10 years from now 20 years 30 years from now àwọn èèyàn á lè sọ pé òun ló kọ́kọ́ ṣe é, òun lẹni tó kọ́kọ́ dánrú ẹ̀ wò. But when you do it unconsciously from a place of essence, from a place of pé ó wuni láti ṣe, ó dẹ̀ jẹ́ ohun tó jẹ́ one's truth, òtítọ́ ẹni, you discover that you've done so many things. Àwọn nǹkan míì rọ̀gbà ká, kò sóhun tá a ṣe nílé ayé yìí tó dúró in monotony, you know. There are things that are always tied to it. There are things that tangles to it. This conversation is not coincidental, you know. Beyond, you know, whatsoever, there's something I would have learned by the time we finish this conversation, you know. There's something you would have, you know, equally inculcated. There's something someone listening would have inculcated. Ohun kan kì í dá dúró, àwọn kan máa ń so mọ́. So at the end of the day, I feel like I have encountered a lot of people who say, oh, you are creating a legacy, you are doing this, you know, you are doing that with Yoruba language. And to be very honest, I feel privileged. Pé, you know, orí ó ṣàmì yẹ láti lè ṣe irú nǹkan báyẹn, because kì í ṣe ìmọ̀ àtinúwá, kì í dẹ̀ ń ṣe ìmọ̀ àgbélẹ̀rò pé mo jíǹde ayé mi o, this is what I want to do. So to be very honest, I feel more privileged, and you know, because I feel like vessel ni àwa olùdá iṣẹ́, you know, ó ti ní ìwọ̀nba oúnjẹ tí ó yẹ kí ẹnu jẹ. Nígbà tí èèyàn bá jẹ ìwọ̀nba oúnjẹ yẹn tán, ẹnu á padé fúnra ẹ̀. Ó ti níwọ̀nba ọ̀rọ̀ tó yẹ kí ẹnu sọ. Ó ti níwọ̀nba iṣẹ́ tí ó yẹ kí a ṣẹ̀dá nígbà tí a sì wà níbí. Tí a bá wá ṣẹ̀dá iṣẹ́ yẹn, and people like you consider it as a legacy, then again, it is the biggest victory. It is the biggest win for me. I do not take it for granted.
You're creating a real legacy that will last decades. And on that note, kí ni ẹ máa fẹ́ kí àwọn èèyàn tó ń wo iṣẹ́ yín bóyá in another 20, 30, even ọgọ́rùn-ún ọdún láti sìn lọ láti máa rò nípa iṣẹ́ yín? What do you, kí ni nǹkan kan àbí méjì tí ẹ máa rò pé ẹ máa fẹ́ kí wọ́n mú jáde nínú àwọn iṣẹ́ tí ẹ ń gbé kalẹ̀ nísìn?
So I feel like I think it was Brimo that said history destroys all Ozymandias. So I feel like our writers, you know, like said that history, you know, and to be very honest, kò sí bá a ṣe fẹ́ ṣe tó, kò sí bá a ṣe fẹ́, again, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So in 10, 20 years from now, a sì máa rẹ́ni tó máa wo iṣẹ́ yìí tó máa ní pé arákùnrin yìí, he was kíní kan, a sì máa rí, ó sì máa wà. To be very honest, when people experience it from different angles. So if 3 people read the Shepe, for example, ohun tí wọ́n á rí or ìlànà tí wọ́n á fi wò is based on their own experiences and their own truth. But one thing that is keen to me, and that I feel like at the end of the day, even from the life I live, I want people to be able to hold on to, is the fact that I preached my truth. Ohun tí mo gbàgbọ́ nínú ẹ̀ ni mò ń ṣẹ̀dá. Ohun tí mo gbàgbọ́ nínú ẹ̀ ni mo fi ń gbélé ayé. Ohun tí mo gbàgbọ́ nínú ẹ̀ ni mo fi ń kéwì. And you know, for me, one thing that is core at the end of the day is that every single person deserves to be treated with respect. Person deserves to be treated with kindness. You know, bóyá èdè ló ń sọ o, bóyá ìyá yìí ló ti wá o, bóyá gbàgbọ́ yìí ló ń ṣe o, until it is proven otherwise. Kò sí ẹ̀sìn, kò sí èdè, kò sí ìgbàgbọ́ tó ju pé ká jẹ́ ènìyàn lọ. There's no culture older, there's no religion older than being human. And maybe if we remember this and we keep this in mind, our society can be better. Maybe we cannot, you know, absolutely create a society that is, you know, free of evil. Because I mean, méjì ládáyé, you know, the yin yang always exist, but at least bóyá lè sunwọ̀n díẹ̀. Exactly. Bóyá lè sunwọ̀n díẹ̀ síra wa, and maybe, you know, cases like, you know, justice for Chanya can, you know, reduce to the minimal level. Nígbà tí àwọn ò bá, because it would be an eyesore. Wọ́n ní tí ayé bá ń tojú, táyé bá ń bàjẹ́, àìmọ̀ wá wọ àwọn àgbà tí ń bẹ níbẹ̀ ni. So if we now live here in years to come, and these evils ó wá peléke sí, ó túmọ̀ sí pàwọ́ tá a wà ní generation yìí gan ṣe ohun tó yẹ ká ṣe. And yes, like I said, maybe people would always see some parts that they feel like, oh, òun náà àlébù ẹ̀ lélẹ̀, òun náà ṣe lé kò tó, òun náà ṣe lé kò dá. But at the end of the day, if you can recognize my humanity above all, ẹ foríjì yòókù. Tẹ́ ẹ bá dẹ̀ foríjì yòókù, òkú tó ti kú, òmùkọ́ tó kọ sínú history book.
Thank you very much for that. That is amazing. And then I like that you touched on one particular concept I was going to, talk about it again, because your books are so controversial. This literary idea of the death of the author. Téèyàn bá ti ṣẹ̀dá nǹkan tó dẹ̀ ti gbé síwájú àwọn ayé, nǹkan kí nǹkan tó bá fi ṣe èròkérò tó bá ní sí, it is removed entirely from you as the author and your own thoughts as you. Tó bá pè nǹkan ní blue, tó bá ní pink náà ní fún àwọn tó jẹ́ pé téèyàn bá ti yọ̀ǹda ẹ̀ fáráyé pé iṣẹ́ yìí mo ti gbé jáde, mo ti yọ̀ǹda ẹ̀. Nǹkan kí nǹkan tó bá dẹ̀ rí fi ṣe, èèyàn á gbà bẹ́ẹ̀ náà ni, which is absolutely, the only thing we can do as creative. So, ó kù ìbéèrè méjì torí mo rí nípa tí fẹ́ máa aago tí ń lọ, àsìkò tí ń lọ. Ìkànnì ń pé kí ni àwa tó kù in this same cultural creative space can do to help promote or to encourage writers like yourself, one. And then kí ni àwọn nǹkan míì tí ẹ ti ń ṣètò ẹ̀ tó yìí ń bọ̀ lọ́nà tí ẹ fẹ́ kí a mọ̀ nípa? Ẹ lè bá mi dáhùn ìbéèrè yẹn fún àwọn tó ń bọ̀.
Ìbéèrè yẹn, okay. Àáwé yìí tá a lè wí. Èyí tá a lè wí tó bá fi jẹ́ padà industry rú, kì í bọ̀nú. Now,
lè dá industry rú bó bá ṣe wù mú wa lẹ́yìn ìmọ̀.
Abánidá kì í bá ní débẹ̀. So I feel like we have the spirit of excellence, but we lack the spirit of collaboration in the art and culture scene. And mi ò mọ̀ bóyá láti kékeré lọ ti fi kọ́ pọ̀lọpọ̀ wa gbé dandan ìwọ ni kò gbé first in class tó bá gbé second, so ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ èèyàn ti wá sọ cultural advocacy àti cultural promotion di eré ìje. I must always be at the forefront,
followers mélòó lẹni yìí ní tó fẹ́ bá mi dá.
Followers mélòó ló ní, you reach out to, a fellow cultural promoter or a fellow cultural pioneer to, create something together or to do something together, and they just treat you like trash, and you're like, kí ni ṣẹlẹ̀ gangan? Or àwọn tí wọ́n bá treat you like trash outrightly, you get to discover that there is a level of zeal that they pour into works or activities that has to do with people that, quote and unquote, have large audience. But àwọn tí wọ́n wá ní large audience, àwa ti àwọn yẹn sí ẹ̀gbẹ́ kan, báwọn yẹn kì í ṣara wa. Ìwọ náà kọ́kọ́ lọ ní 2 million followers náà. Ìwọ náà kọ́kọ́ lọ gbé nǹkan ṣe. But no, táwọn kùn bá ti àwa lẹ́yìn, àwọn ò ní dé ibi tá a dé yìí àti ẹ̀ lérò pé a máa kọ ìwé Yorùbá, or we'll even be having this conversation in the first place. So I feel like no one is lesser than the other, and there is no role being played by any cultural patron that is lesser than the other. What you are doing is 100% important to the culture. What Washere, Olalekan Fabilola, Lumi, all of these guys, Yoba, what they are doing is equally important to the culture. Kò sí èyí kan tó tóbi ju èyí kan lọ, because gbogbo wọn ló ní void. Don't feel what science in Yoruba is doing, mi ò lè ṣe.
Honestly,
because mi ò ka science débẹ̀, mi ò délé jòkó ní orí àga máṣóyìnbó kí n máa sọ pé ẹ bá mi yọ yes yẹn, ẹ bá mi yọ no yẹn. No, bí orí dání sílà ń gbé ohun tá a sì wáyé láàyè. But when we collaborate and we collectively support each other, okay, àrẹ̀mọ kọṣẹ́ o, okay, ẹ jẹ́ kí even tó bá ti yẹ pé repost ni or share or okay, or báwo la ṣe máa pera wa cultural patron láti ìràwé ara wa yóò jogun fún wa? Bó la ṣe pera wa cultural patron táàjọ mọ gbé ìlú kan náà tẹ́nìkan sì mọ ṣe òde cultural patron táà nílé jáde ká lọ síbẹ̀ ká lọ gbárùkù tí àbí pàtí ẹ̀wà aráyè lọ ká ti ẹ̀wà share lórí Instagram story. These are the basic things, and you have all there are internal things. There are internal things that are even heavier than these things that goes on. And kind of our kan wà tó yẹ pé ọlọ́kàn òkúta ni wá. But for some people, it dampens their spirits. Some people do not have enough thick skin, and it make them feel unwanted. It make them feel like, oh, what they are doing is not right enough. I would, okay, in the name of the industry rule, there was this case of there's this guy online, Omo Aburumaku, funny thinker, who made a video back then, calling out Maso Oyinbo pé òun pitch sí pé òun fẹ́ wá sí program ẹ̀, kò pé òun, tó bá dẹ̀ pé òun wá, ó ti mọ̀ pé òun á jẹ gbogbo owó ẹ̀ because òun gan ọmọ Yorùbá jù lọ. And it just felt very unnecessary to me. Kí ló dé, ta ló ń bá ẹ díje? Why are you competing? àìmọye I've been on Maso Oyinbo, àìmọye èèyàn tó ń ṣèdè Yorùbá tó ti lọ sí Maso Oyinbo tí wọn ò mẹ́gbẹ̀lẹ́gbẹ̀ wálé. But at the end of the day, you are not going because of the money per se. You are going because what he is doing is valid. You are going because one of your or see, and it's a part of cultural propagation. But the moment that happens, eléyìí mo mọ̀ jù lọ, mo ní mọ̀ jù lọ, àjùlọ ta dámẹ́dá there are things that you know that I do not know. There are things that you will know tí mi ò ní ever mọ̀. Àjùlọ wà, hierarchy would always exist. In space. You get, but nígbà tí oníkálukú bá fọwọ́sowọ́pọ̀ tá a rí gẹ́gẹ́ bí ìdíje, tá a rí gẹ́gẹ́ bí pé nǹkan ẹyọ kan ní gbogbo wa jọ ń ṣe, ọ̀nà tá à ń gbà ṣe òun ló ya ọ̀tọ̀ọ̀tọ̀. It is easier for us to support each other and promote each other. There are some spaces that I cannot feel that I would have to recommend another cultural patron. But ìgbà tó wá bá mi tí mo bá sọ pé ohun tí mi ò bá ti lè ṣe o, ẹlòmíì ò bọ̀rọ̀ ṣe, opportunity yẹn ò bá ti wá fún mi, kò bọ̀rọ̀ wá sọ́dọ̀ ẹlòmíì. Are we really promoting culture, or we are promoting our own selves? Are we really doing it for the culture, or we are doing it? And that is why I said pé àṣà fúnra ẹ̀ ó mọ àwọn tó ń gbé òun ga. Àwọn tó dẹ̀ ń ṣe in the name of biases and capitalism, wọ́n mọ ohun tí wọ́n ń ṣe. But at the end of the day, ìgbẹ̀yìn ní ń du olóko àdá. Ọlọ́run orí funny thing àti bẹ́ẹ̀ mú mi ò fẹ́ mọ̀ òwe pa. It is what it is at the end of the day. I admire what he does. I genuinely admire what he does. I think what the guy does is impeccable. He has a good grasp of language. But kì í ṣe DJ Kúnlé Àfọ́dù ń ṣe léèmọ̀, Ọlálékan Fábínọlá ń ṣe Maso Oyinbo. Ẹ̀kọ́ èdè Yorùbá làwọn méjèèjì ń kọ́yàn. There are people who still read my books and they do not even pick the thematic subject. They just pick something about the Yoruba language on the basic learning level. There are people who come to your page, as an adult, I can come to your page and content that you will create for children. I will still pick something that resonates with me. But when you encounter these works, you always get to learn. And I really hope that we do better. And I mean, outside that, personally, for 2026, I have plans. I have plans to roll out more of my poetry works, studio produced works in this sense on streaming platforms. I want it to be that Kawa, the same way we come online and we use music as music as sounds on our videos. Kale we Yoruba, Kale ni àwọn ṣe wa lórí Spotify, Deezer, and all of that. I want to do more by putting these works on streaming platforms. And kò sí ohun tó sọ pé Yorùbá chanter or Yorùbá poet kò lè tí chat. Exactly, yes. And audiobook, in fact, I think that for 2026, audio works is something that I'm very heavy on. Because I mean, away from the fact of Beboya, I want to that there are equally people who, I hate to say that people living with disability, but people with conditions, so maybe visually they cannot exactly consume this kind of works. We have to always think of those people. We have to create works that are accessible. So it's one of the reasons why I'm very particular about creating audio works. And of course, I'm looking at the possibility of collaborating more also with people, not even necessarily people doing this form of art, people in other fields, people in tech, you know, film or something, people in, you know, tech, people in research that has to do with language. Báwo la ṣe lè gbé èdè Yorùbá wọnú nǹkan tó ń ṣe? Báwo la ṣe lè so pọ̀ tó jẹ́ pé the idea and their intention will not be compromised, but at the end of the day, Yoruba will still stand, because no, Yoruba is not crude. Our native language is not crude. Kò kí ń ṣe ohun tó yẹ ká rọ́ sẹ́yìn àbí tó yẹ ká sọ pé òtá bá fẹ́ ṣe fíìmù babaláwo nìkan ni ó yẹ kí wọ́n lò.
Language geniuses. I always tell people, if you think that láti ẹ̀ ti lè ka ìkan láti ení dé ogún, you have to have the mental acuity to be able to understand approximations. That is not a Yoruba. It is a language of geniuses. So I need láti
Exactly.
with that knowledge that this language is an elevated language. And this is no shade to other languages. I don't know the other languages. I believe that every language deserves to be promoted and not allowed to go to ruin. But Aremo, now when it comes to Gbogbo very important work you're planning to do for the future, and we'll be on the lookout for it. Ṣùgbọ́n ṣé ẹ ní àwọn ètò kan, bóyá event àbí spoken word tí ẹ fẹ́ jẹ́ kí àwọn èèyàn mọ̀ nípa going, you know, in the recent future, tí ẹ fẹ́ fi tó wa létí as well, just to...
So, kí ló ń pè, modern day alárìnjó ni wá, kò fẹ́ sígbà tí ẹsẹ̀ wa ò kì í já ńlé já lọ́hùn, you know, àlóko àlódò, bẹ́ẹ̀ bá pè wá sápá ó pa wá, you know. So we're always going, you know, having one performance or the other. But personally, creating a mass event, maybe tomorrow, you know, a surprise might come up, but I don't see myself creating, you know, a performance event, because again, because I feel like a lot of people do things for boya audience kan ti wà, you know, tí wọ́n ra tickets and all of that. But you know, I intend to do performance concerts. I mean, the same way we have music concerts, I intend to have a Yoruba poetry concert, but maybe that is still in the book for maybe 2027 or 2028. But by that time, when I'm doing it, it is because the audience themselves knows that at Sikotito, exactly, and not because why ticket carry on there. But again, like I said, and you know, bọ́ọ̀lù ti rí ọ̀la kì í rí bẹ́ẹ̀ ní mú babaláwo dífá ojoojúmọ́. So you know, tí ó bá wá táyọ̀ bá ṣe lọ, à ó sọ̀kù ẹ̀.
Ẹ máa fi tó wa létí nígbàkigbà tí nǹkan kí nǹkan bá ti fẹ́ ṣẹlẹ̀, tẹ́ ẹ bá ti fẹ́ gbé nǹkan kalẹ̀, ẹ jẹ́ ká mọ̀. Tó, ẹ ṣeun gan-an. Ṣé ó ní ọ̀rọ̀ ìkádìí kan àbí méjì tẹ́ ẹ fẹ́ sọ, àbí ṣé gbogbo ẹ̀ láti sọ tó ń sìn?
Well, okay. Since this is on culture, since this, you know, this conversation is, even though I feel like it expands beyond culture, at the end of the day, everything we've discussed, well, I mean, the root is still culture. So I keep saying it that ohun tí à ń pè ní orírun, ohun tí à ń pè ní orísun, you know, ó kọ̀ọ̀kan já, you know, layered identity, you know, èdè, ohun tí ó dẹ̀ wá pọ̀ ni, ohun tí a ṣà tá bá ní pé ká máa ṣe, you know, ohun tí ó tọ́ kí a máa ṣe, òun là ń pè láṣà àti ṣe. Nítorí bẹ́ẹ̀, tí a bá mọ̀ bẹ́ẹ̀, tí ó rí bẹ́ẹ̀, it goes beyond, you know, when people hear cultural preservation, they think that it's from the lenses of, you know, doing it for public domains or something. But nínú ilé èèyàn gan, téèyàn bá preserve culture, ilé á dàrú. Nínú ilé èèyàn, téèyàn bá preserve culture, ìrìn àjò èèyàn á dàrú. And then maybe what you are seeking at the end of the day is seeking you. Tí a bá lè sún ẹsẹ̀ sẹ́yìn, you know, tí kì í ṣe ti ìfàsẹ́yìn, you know, tí a lọ wo àwọn ohun tí a ti gbàgbé sẹ́yìn, you know, personally, exactly, èyí tó dá ń bẹ̀, you know, because I mean, there are mistakes in the past too. Personally,
has their mistakes.
I know of my grandfather, I know of my grandmother from both, you know, maternal side and paternal side. I have an idea of my great-grandfather and great-grandmother from both sides. But tó bá ti lè kọjá àwọn méjèèjì, àwọn tó ṣíwájú yẹn, I don't know what they look like. I don't know what their life. Àwọn nǹkan sì wà tá à ń gbàgbé nípa bá a ṣe ń gbàgbé pé àti ẹ̀ mọ igi ìdílé wa lè tọ́ padà sẹ́yìn. What we are doing now, kò sóhun tuntun lábẹ́ ọ̀run. Ipa tí a wà is a replica of what some of our ancestors have done in some ways. And maybe the answer we are seeking is in the roots, is in the identity that we've abandoned. And tó bá ní pé kó o gbàṣà ẹ̀ ga, kò necessarily sọ fún ẹ pé wọ́n ní pé kó o lọ doníṣẹ̀ṣe, àbí tó bá yẹ pé kiriyó ló fẹ́ yà, fine. Tó bá yẹ pé Islam ló fẹ́ ṣe, fine. In fact, tó bá yẹ pé religious ló fẹ́ ṣe, fine. Èdè àtẹ̀sìn, people confuse it a lot. Èdè dúró, ẹ̀sìn dúró, but ẹni tí ò bá mọra ẹ̀ kò lè mọlúwa.
Ẹ ṣeun, ọ̀rọ̀ pàtàkì dẹ́lẹ́sán yẹn o. Go back and look and get the good ones. Well, good is is a bit of
good is relative.
But basically, take what is valuable for you. Don't consign to, LA is backward, is this. Always do reassess and review. And it is an important thing because, again, so always, again, conversations like this are an invitation for you, viewers, to go back, delve deep, and look at what is good, what is favorable, what is valuable within your cultures, whether it be Yoruba or any other Nigerian, African, or global culture. Please do that. Ní báyìí, a ti dé ìparí ètò wa. Ààrẹ Mọ Gemini, ẹ ṣé gan-an, mo dúpẹ́ o, mo ké sí yín, ẹ̀dẹ̀ jẹ́ mi. Mo tún sọ fún yín pé àmì ò ní lè ṣe ọjọ́ yìí mo ti ẹ̀dẹ̀ tún ní bẹ́ẹ̀ náà ni. Mo dúpẹ́ gidi gan. Thank you so very much. Àjọṣe wa ò ní bàjẹ́, àdẹ̀ ní tí eléyìí ṣàṣemọ́.
Àṣẹ Èdùmàrè. Ẹ ṣeun gidi gan. Mo nígbàgbọ́ pé ṣọ́ṣọ́ṣọ́ nílé àtàrí máa ń kún. Ilé yín àti ilé gbogbo wa àtàwọn tí ó ń wò wá náà, ilé wọn yóò máa kún fún ire, yóò máa kún fún ayọ̀. Àbòtán ni adẹ́dàmbò dí ìgbín. Àṣírí ẹnìkankan wa kò ní tú láṣẹ Èdùmàrè, a ò sì ní fi ẹsẹ̀ gún. Ìrànwọ́ á máa bẹ fún wa. And like I would always say, my door is always open whatsoever. I personally, and this is not me saying this because you are here, this is me saying this because I think that what you do within your space is amazing. And even with the fact that you are not sí lórílẹ̀ tá a lè kà fún pé orílẹ̀ Yorùbá presently, what you still do still brings that connectedness, and it does not make you feel like you are above, outside the shore or something. And I feel it's really important work. It's genuine important work. You are a voice. You are a voice that matters. And I hope that you never lose your fire. You never lose your spark. And àwa wà níbí láti ṣe ohunkóhun tí a bá lè ṣe within our capacity, every time to root and support what you do.
That is my hope and my future personality about how to collaborate more with people on ground and even spend more time, because again, for me, there's a lot of inspiration that can be gained from ground zero, as we say.
Absolutely. Ipa wa ò ní pin ní àṣẹ Èdùmàrè. And I say that ohun tá a bá ti ń pè ní èdè, pẹ̀lú bá a ṣe ń sọ pé èdè, ohun tí ó dè wá papọ̀, ohun tó tún lè dè wá dọindọin náà ni. Èmi wúre pé gbogbo ìgbà tí èdè bá ń ṣe dídí ẹ̀, ó máa dè wá pọ̀ ní tire ni, kò ní jẹ́ èdè fún wa láṣẹ Èdùmàrè. Bá a sì ṣe ń gbé àṣà ga, àwa ò ní di àṣà dànù. Nípa bẹ́ẹ̀, ẹ ṣeun gidi tí ẹ bá mi jíròrò. And I really hope that this, because I feel like this is a brilliant and, innovative idea. I hope that, it's something you sustain. I personally look forward to, you having more conversations of this nature with more people, within this space. And personally, I am looking out for it.
Please wish me well on it. And I'm very honored that you are my first guest. I did not think of it as my only. I thought ÀRЭ MỌ GEMINI is my first, and I am absolutely amazed and humbled that you have given me this opportunity to speak with you. At any time, no, this is my very first episode of this. Please look out for more. Ẹ ṣeun o tí ẹ ń bá wa lọ láti bí wákàtí méjì tí a ti ń sọ̀rọ̀ sí. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for listening. Thank you for commenting. Ẹ má bínú, mi ò tí ì wá tech savvy débi tí màá máa comment on the ẹ ṣáà rọra máa bá mi ká lọ. Màá tún máa gbìyànjú sí bí n bá ṣe ń lọ, but thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you. If you are not following us currently, please do follow us, comment, look at what we do. ÀRЭ MỌ GEMINI is there. I am here, and we will be looking out for you and for your contributions, your feedback. Ẹ ṣeun gan, ó dàárọ̀.